Yesterday, a mother bade her final farewell to her son, though she did not step into that heartbreaking day carrying her pain in isolation. Across the exact span of time preceding that memorial, 3 distinct developments in the investigation converged simultaneously. The FBI officially clarified its exact participation in this inquiry on the record, marking its first comprehensive statement since the case opened. A former Mississippi judge publicly voiced deep skepticism regarding whether the district attorney's office will ultimately pursue justice. And Nolan Wells was laid to rest yesterday morning, July 20th, in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, exactly 16 days after his body was retrieved from the waters surrounding Horn Island. 3 major developments surrounding the service. Today, we analyze every piece of it. Before examining these recent shifts, a brief notice. This narrative details the loss of an 18-year-old and active threats directed at individuals tied to the investigation. If these topics are challenging for you today, please prioritize your personal well-being. If you are joining us for the first time, take a moment to subscribe right now. We are monitoring this investigation continuously and will deliver confirmed progress as it unfolds. Tell us in the comment section below where you are tuning in from today. Let us begin with the memorial events. The service took place at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs, the very community where Nolan spent his childhood, where he competed on the gridiron, long before Southwest Mississippi Community College extended an athletic offer, and where local residents, coaches, and educators observed him growing into the young man the public currently recognizes solely through news stories. Visiting hours ran from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. yesterday morning, with the funeral ceremony starting right afterward. Reverend Al Sharpton gave the eulogy. Handling the funeral logistics was Lockett Williams Mortuary in Gulfport. Film producer Tyler Perry funded the entire cost of the funeral services, while former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick assisted with financing the independent autopsy requested by the family. Media executive Byron Allen made a substantial financial contribution to a legacy fund created in Nolan's honor, alongside several prominent figures who offered support as this investigation gained national prominence. Based on revised reports, the memorial was made accessible to loved ones, friends, and news representatives, a clear departure from prior plans to keep the ceremony strictly private. Consequently, more attendees experienced this occasion firsthand, rather than viewing it through a broadcast screen. Following the service, the family hosted a celebration of life at the Jackson County Fairgrounds, characterized by Nolan's mother, Christine Wansley, not as a standard repast, but as an event crafted intentionally to honor the authentic life her son lived. That single element represents the lone certainty she maintained in a situation where virtually every other detail remained completely outside her influence. Yet as today unfolds, that morning sits alongside 2 fresh developments that were completely absent from this case just days ago. The initial update came from a federal department that maintained nearly total public silence for weeks. The second came from the primary witness surrounding the investigation's most contested element, sharing her account directly for the very first time without intermediaries altering her words. We start with the FBI. For the vast majority of this investigation, a single unanswered question shadowed every step it took, surfacing in online discussions and private exchanges among onlookers trying to parse a narrative that never quite cohered. What brought the Federal Bureau of Investigation into what was, on paper, a regional Mississippi death inquiry? The answer had previously appeared only in fragmented pieces, a stray comment here, an unverified lead there, with no complete explanation or official statement originating from the agency itself. That degree of silence impacts a high-profile case heavily. It rarely stays empty for long. The public fills that void with theories, with anxiety, and with the most disturbing scenarios their minds can formulate, because living with uncertainty often feels far heavier than confronting a hard reality. For a family already worn down by the strain of seeking basic answers, that unexplained federal involvement adds a distinct layer of dread. Is this situation far broader than we were led to believe, or is information being withheld from us? With every day the FBI remained silent, those concerns intensified, not due to concrete evidence backing them, but because silence in such a visible investigation seldom communicates reassurance. That dynamic shifted this past week when the FBI's Jackson Field office issued an explicit written statement directly defining its involvement for the very first time since the case began. That official record leaves zero ambiguity regarding one core fact. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office maintains full lead authority over this investigation and will continue directing it from beginning to end. The FBI categorizes its own presence purely as support, offering federal tools and drawing on federal partnerships when requested, rather than taking over the proceedings. That assistance was extended specifically because Jackson County requested it, building upon what the agency describes as decades of collaborative work alongside local law enforcement on complex matters of this nature. There is something significant to evaluate regarding the timing of that official release. Federal agencies almost never offer public explanations while an inquiry remains active. The reality that this branch chose to do so in writing, on the record, indicates they recognized precisely how much damage an open question was inflicting on a family desperately seeking any measure of stability. Nested within that same document is the precise detail explaining why federal agents entered this matter at all, and it bears no relation to the circumstances of how Nolan died. According to the FBI, its resources have been directed specifically toward investigating interstate threats, intimidating communications directed at individuals tied to this case, threats severe enough and spanning enough state borders to trigger federal jurisdiction independently, entirely separate from the core question of what transpired with Nolan on that island. This is not idle speculation, nor is it a rumor circulating unchecked across social media. Jackson County Chancery Judge Ashlee Cole has directly confirmed in her own words that she has been targeted with threats linked to this case. A sitting judge and a mother whose family was pulled straight into the aftermath of a teenager's death merely due to their connection to this narrative. Consider for a moment what that truly signifies. A woman with no involvement in the events on that island, whose sole connection to this matter is that a loved one was present that day, now finds herself facing threats severe enough to command the direct focus of the federal government. That is not a minor detail. That is an additional family dragged into the aftermath of a tragedy they had no part in creating. We will not repeat the specific statements made toward her, as doing so serves no constructive purpose here and would only inflict further distress on a household already operating under intense strain. What remains critical and now officially validated is that those threats occurred. They were grave enough to trigger federal intervention, and investigators are actively tracing their exact origins. For a threat to cross into federal jurisdiction, it generally requires an individual in one state transmitting a threatening message to a recipient in a different state using electronic or telephonic channels that disregard state boundaries. That represents the exact category of offense the FBI is structured to address, regardless of the scale of the primary local investigation. So here is where the official record stands as of today, July 21st, formally confirmed in writing by the agency itself. Federal agents are not investigating the cause of Nolan Wells' death. That responsibility rests exclusively with Jackson County. What federal investigators are actively pursuing is the identity of whoever is issuing threats to the individuals now tied to his story, an effort moving forward quietly behind every other public development in this case. It is equally important to note that this clarification did not materialize out of nowhere. It arrived shortly after Nolan's parents conducted a direct meeting with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McIlrath, accompanied by attorney Ben Crump, who confirmed afterward that the findings of this investigation will be presented to a grand jury upon completion. Crump also stated that Nolan's mobile device will undergo a joint technical analysis, with the family's independent forensic experts reviewing the data alongside law enforcement's internal findings. Sheriff John Ledbetter has publicly stated that the Wells family deserves a comprehensive, fact-driven inquiry, and that his department is fully committed to providing that exact outcome. Viewed together, these elements illustrate a case currently progressing along multiple parallel tracks. A sheriff's department directing the core death investigation, a district attorney's office preparing evidence for a grand jury, a family's independent legal team conducting its own review, two separate autopsy procedures, and now a federal statement explicitly defining where the FBI fits into the broader picture. Tracking each moving piece and recognizing that progress in one area does not automatically dictate outcomes in another is precisely what makes following a case like this so challenging to process with total clarity. Now, the second silence that broke this week? Her name is Katie. She was never a mystery in this case, not in the way the internet often treated her. From the earliest days after Nolan went missing, her identity had already surfaced. Her own mother, Gracie McCormick, confirmed on Facebook that her daughter had spent time with Nolan on Horn Island that day, and that she had already reached out to his family directly. Katie was never hiding. Her name was known almost from the beginning. What was missing for nearly 2 full weeks was her own voice. Think about what that actually means for a young woman who did nothing wrong, who simply happened to spend an afternoon talking to someone on a beach. A young woman barely out of her teenage years herself suddenly finds her name attached to one of the most talked about deaths in the country. Strangers online building theories around her, her own words twisted, repeated, argued over by people who never met her and never met Nolan. And through all of it, she said almost nothing publicly. Everything the world thought it knew about what Katie said came through someone else's account. First, it came through a family friend, someone who had heard Katie's version secondhand and relayed it to others, doing her best to represent something she had not personally experienced. Then it came through Katie's own mother, posting on Facebook, not to reveal new information, but simply to correct rumors that had already spun far beyond anything Katie herself had ever actually claimed. Every single version of Katie's account for 2 weeks passed through someone else's memory and someone else's wording before it ever reached the one person who needed to hear it most, Nolan's mother. That changed this past week. According to Christine Wansley, she and Katie finally sat down together face to face. Not a phone call summarized by a third party, not another post filtered through relatives, but an actual conversation in person between the two people this entire case has needed to hear from directly since the very beginning. The mother who has spent over 2 weeks searching for the truth about her son, and the young woman who spoke with him in his final confirmed minutes on that beach. And according to Christine, what Katie told her, in her own words, did not match the story she had been hearing from everyone else. Picture that meeting for a moment. Two people who had never met before this, brought together by the worst possible circumstance, sitting across from one another. One of them, a mother trying to reconstruct her son's final hours from fragments gathered secondhand. The other, a young woman trying to explain honestly what she remembers, knowing every word she says will be picked apart by an audience far beyond the room she is sitting in. Here is what Katie has maintained consistently from the very start. Katie and Nolan spent time on Horn Island that day. At some point, the two of them parted ways. Katie got back on a boat with her own friends, separate entirely from Nolan's group. Based on what he told her before they separated, she believed Nolan intended to rejoin his own friends and head back to the mainland with them. But here is the detail that changes how this entire contradiction should actually be understood. The detail that has been lost in almost every argument about this case online. Katie never actually saw Nolan get on that boat. She assumed it based on a real conversation, based on what he told her directly in the last moments before they went their separate ways. She did not personally witness him rejoining his friends afterward. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this case right now. It means this is not two witnesses staring at the exact same moment and describing two opposite things. Katie is not claiming she watched Nolan walk away from her and step onto that boat with her own eyes. She is saying he told her his plan, and in that moment she had no reason to doubt it. An assumption based on a real and specific conversation, not an eyewitness account of what happened after. And that leaves a gap, a real, unresolved, unaccounted for gap. The space between the moment Nolan told Katie his intention and whatever actually happened once she walked away toward her own friends. Nobody has been able to fill that gap. Not Katie, not his friends who have offered their own account of what he told them, not his family who have spent 2 weeks trying to reconcile two versions that were never quite the same, and not investigators who are still working through digital evidence, phone records, and witness statements, trying to reconstruct exactly what happened in the hours after Nolan and Katie parted ways. For 2 weeks, this contradiction was treated publicly as a simple standoff. One side insists he stayed on the island, another side insists he planned to leave. But Katie's own account, finally delivered directly and in her own words, is far more careful than either extreme. It is not a flat denial of what his friends have said happened. It is an honest, specific acknowledgement of the limits of what she actually witnessed with her own eyes. And that is precisely why this moment carries the weight it does. Not because Katie revealed something shocking, not because she offered some final conclusive answer that solves the case, but because for the first time since Nolan disappeared, his mother heard the truth directly from the one person outside his friend group who spoke with him last, without a relative's memory reshaping it, without a Facebook post softening or filtering her words, without 2 full weeks of internet speculation standing between them. It would have been easier for Katie to stay quiet, to let the family friend's version stand, to let her mother's Facebook posts be the last word on what she remembers. Instead, she chose to sit across from a woman grieving her son and answer questions in person that she could have avoided altogether. That choice does not undo whatever happened after she and Nolan parted ways, but it says something about who she is at a moment when the easier path would have been silence. This kind of confusion has followed this case from nearly the beginning, and it is worth remembering why context matters so much here. Just recently, a photo appeared online showing Nolan at a pool party, which many took as proof that he had been alive after the 4th of July. It was later confirmed through image details and an account from his friend Tristan Shepard that the photo had actually been taken a full week earlier, on June 27th, before Nolan ever set foot on Horn Island. Around the same time, a separate video many believed showed Nolan in a confrontation shortly before he disappeared turned out to feature a different voice entirely. Shepard confirmed directly and repeatedly that the voice on that recording was his own, not Nolan's. Both of those corrections point to the same underlying pattern that has defined this case since day one. In the space created by two still pending autopsies, unverified claims have consistently moved faster than confirmed facts. That pattern is worth remembering with every new detail that surfaces, including everything covered this morning. Confirmed information and second-hand claims can look identical at first glance. The only way to tell them apart is to keep asking, every single time, exactly where a given detail actually came from. And these two threads, the FBI's statement and Katie's account, are more connected than they might first appear. The same week Katie chose to speak directly, Judge Ashlee Cole confirmed in her own name that she is living under active threats tied to this case. Two very different people in two very different positions, both facing real consequences simply for being connected to Nolan Wells' story. Every single person tied to this case is now weighing some version of the same question. What does it cost to come forward? What does it cost to tell the truth publicly in a case already this exposed to public anger and public suspicion? Friends who were on that island, family members trying to help, even a judge with no direct connection to the events themselves are all now facing the same reality. Proximity to this story, however small, has come with a real and confirmed cost. That is the weight Katie was carrying when she chose to sit down with Christine anyway. Not everyone following this case views the grand jury referral itself as a sign of guaranteed progress. Former Mississippi Judge Carlos Moore has raised concerns publicly, pointing to what he describes as this district attorney's office having handled a previous unrelated case in a way that failed to produce an indictment despite what he calls overwhelming evidence. He has said he intends to keep watching this case closely to make sure it does not quietly stall the way he believes that earlier case did. Other legal voices following this case have offered a more measured read, noting that a grand jury referral is often standard procedure for any death considered unnatural or suspicious, not proof on its own that foul play has been confirmed. Both perspectives are worth holding at the same time. Skepticism rooted in real history with a specific office is not the same as assuming the worst without cause, and neither view cancels out the other. The real test will not be the referral itself, but what a grand jury ultimately does with whatever evidence this investigation produces. If this case matters to you, subscribe now so you are here for every update as it happens. We are not going anywhere until this family gets the real answers they deserve. That brings us back to where these updates began. 2 weeks of silence. 2 weeks of a mother hearing one version of her son's final hours from strangers online and an entirely different version from the very friends who were with him that day. 2 weeks of not knowing which version, if either, was actually true. And then, finally, a conversation. Katie sitting across from Christine, face to face. No relative speaking on her behalf, no second-hand post attempting to explain what she meant, just Katie telling Nolan's mother in her own words an account of that day that did not match what she had been told by everyone else. Not a confession, not a solution to this case, but an honest account delivered directly from a young woman who has spent 2 weeks carrying the weight of being at the center of a story she never asked to become part of. That conversation does not close this case. It cannot. It does not explain how Nolan ended up in the water off Horn Island. It does not fill the gap between the moment he told Katie his plan and whatever happened in the hours after she walked away toward her own friends. That gap remains exactly what it has been for over 2 weeks now, open, unresolved, unaccounted for by anyone. What that conversation does do is bring this family one step closer to the truth than they were even a week ago. One direct account, spoken face to face, instead of another version filtered through someone else's memory. It does not end this story, but it moves it forward in a way 2 weeks of speculation never could. As of today, July 21st, this family has buried their 18-year-old son, still waiting on 2 autopsies, neither of which has been completed, still waiting on a grand jury that has not yet convened, still without the full truth of what actually happened to him on that island, still living under the shadow of threats that have reached far beyond anything they ever imagined having to face when they sent their son off for a 4th of July trip with friends. This case has tested nearly every relationship connected to it, all within the same short stretch of time. A federal agency forced to explain itself in public, a young woman forced to become a central witness in a story she never chose to be part of, a family forced to live under real protection from people who wish them harm simply for their closeness to this tragedy, and a mother and father who had to bury their son under a level of scrutiny that almost no grieving family has ever had to withstand. Somewhere inside that church yesterday, a mother stood in front of people who loved her son and tried to talk about who he was rather than how he died. That is not closure. It is something smaller, and in its own way, something harder. It is a family choosing to make space for love in the middle of a story that has given them so little room to feel anything but grief. And somewhere outside that church, people who never met Nolan Wells will still be watching, carrying 2 weeks of headlines and half-answers with them, waiting the same way this family is waiting for the day when silence finally gives way to the whole truth.